Hello everybody, I'm back for another video. So just a quick note, my YouTube channel has received its first comments. That was pretty cool. Thank you to the person who commented. Didn't say much about themselves, but I'm assuming it's probably a man, but who knows. Um, anyway, so today I was going to try something maybe a little different. Like usually I just talk about whatever's on my mind, but today I wanted to do something, maybe you could call it a book review of sorts or reflections from a book. But anyway, so I like to read. Uh, you probably don't know that about me, but I do enjoy reading. I've been trying to become more of an avid reader. Trying to discover classic literature and classic novels and things like that, and maybe gain more of an appreciation for them and become more well versed in these things. So recently, a book I read was the book Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis, which is one of his most well known works. And I kind of knew going into it that it was meant to be a satire of middle class American life and talking about how it's empty or meaningless and lacking. And, Babbitt is sort of an archetype for the middle class conformist in America. And it was published in 1922. So I was going to give some thoughts on the book, and there might be some spoilers. So if you intend to read the book and don't want anything spoiled for you, then you can skip this video and come back once you've read it. But so yeah, basically, Babbitt takes place in a fictional Midwestern city, and Babbitt is a guy who's 46 years old. He's got 3 kids, and he works as a real estate broker. And by on the surface at least, he appears to be just a normal everyday guy who's a respected member of his community. He's sort of he's not particularly intellectual, but he's achieved most of the things that are expected of middle class people. He's got a house, a family, a car. He makes decent money. And basically, the book is about Babbitt and his struggles with, conformity, his struggles with feeling like there must be something more to life than this. And, there are some things that Babbitt does which kind of break with conformity. Like he starts flirting with different political ideas. He tries to take a trip to get away from it all. He, at one point late in the book, he actually has an affair. Uh, and yeah, I guess the main idea of the book is that middle class American life is ultimately sort of vapid, sort of hollow, sort of meaningless, and you know these Babbitt is kind of supposed to be. Well, it's hard to know what Sinclair Lewis intended for the audience to think of Babbitt, because he doesn't always portray him in the most flattering light. Like he portrays him as kind of a buffoon at times. He portrays him as sort of a. I mean, there's one scene where they discuss a business dealing he does that is a bit shady. So these things don't exactly make him a sympathetic character. But I've heard other people interpret the book as saying that Babbitt is really supposed to be a tragic figure, and you're supposed to feel bad for him because of how empty his life ultimately is. And I know a lot of the literary elites like to talk about Sinclair Lewis as, oh, he's the guy who saw Middle America for what it really was and how empty it was. But I don't know. I feel like this book, it doesn't really offer any solutions. It doesn't really offer much in the way of, like, it feels more like Sinclair Lewis decided to sit back and mock the whole thing and just kind of scoff at how ridiculous these people are, how they don't have very sophisticated artistic tastes, how they don't have very, deep, faith in anything. How politically they just kind of do what everybody else says. And, Babbitt contradicts himself a lot of the time. And to me, I didn't think it was a great book. So, yeah, I guess the takeaway I got from the book was that Sinclair Lewis was a very talented wordsmith, but I would not call him a great writer, because I think a lot of his ideas just feel kind of dated. They feel kind of shallow. I mean, in that interwar period in America, I guess he was observing life and how it was, but it seemed like he kind of mocked middle America, but didn't really offer anything better. It seems like the message of the book is basically stop being a conformist because, well, again, I told you there'll be spoilers. In the final chapter of the book, what happens is Babbitt's son elopes with the girl next door who he'd been dating for a while, and it basically ends with Babbitt telling his son, I've spent my whole life doing what everyone expected me to do, and because obviously everyone's upset, like, how could you just go out and get married like that? And but Babbitt tells his son, I'm proud of you for doing things your way and not just conforming to everyone else's expectations, because that's what I've done my whole life, and I was never happy doing it. So I hope you keep doing it your way. So yeah, the message of the book, I think, that Sinclair Lewis wanted people to take away was, don't be a conformist. Don't just do what everybody expects you to do. Which, it's one of those American individualist ideas that sounds really nice, and most people pay lip service to it today. Is like, don't just follow the crowd, be your own person. But it doesn't really account for the fact that some degree of conformity is necessary for societal cohesion. And I mean, I look at Sinclair Lewis himself. I mean, he had 2 marriages that ended in divorce. I think he had 2 sons. He was an alcoholic who eventually kind of drank himself to death. I mean, it's easy for a guy like Sinclair Lewis, who's more of a literary type, to sit and mock the average middle American working man, but a society full of Sinclair Lewises wouldn't exactly be a functional one. So to me, I felt like his criticism sort of rings hollow nowadays, because we've seen where radical individualism has led the West, and we can see that it's just resulted in our society gradually coming apart to where there really is no real culture, there really is no real cohesion, there's really no sense of us anymore. And I guess I'll give, like I said, I think I said earlier, Lewis, I admire his way with words. I think some of his descriptions of scenes and painting a picture with words, he does a very good job of that, but I wouldn't call him a great writer, because I don't think his ideas really, I don't think he really had a lot to say. They were just kind of trendy intellectual ideas at the time, but I don't know if they were really all that insightful, and that's why I don't think Sinclair Lewis is really going to, I mean, really, honestly, I don't think he's considered one of the great writers. I don't think he's part of the canon anymore. He was just kind of a writer who was popular in his day, but is only vaguely remembered nowadays. I mean, I guess people probably still read his books, but not many people consider him like a towering figure in the literary world. So yeah, I guess just, I will give him credit. At least this book made me think. It made me question, what my thoughts on conformity are. And yeah, I guess as an American, especially, I do like the idea that we shouldn't all just follow the crowd, and we shouldn't get our opinions from the newspaper and the people around us. We should actually be willing to think for ourselves and, do what we want to do. I mean, all that sounds good, but like, we kind of see how gradually we've lost a lot of social capital over the generations, how the more individualistic we've gotten, the more atomized we've gotten. And now we live in a world where people are not forming families. We live in a world where people are not, a lot of people aren't even dating anymore, because nobody can really stand each other. I mean, and, this idea of don't conform, don't be like everybody else. Well, sometimes I think we need to be conformist. Sometimes I think a sort of, doing what people expect you to do is often, the reason they expect you to do is because that's the best way. Not always, of course, but I think, to just say be nonconformist for nonconformism's sake is, I think that's an erroneous mentality. I mean, not everyone, I mean, I remember somebody talking about this once. He said that, if everybody in society was always questioning everything, nothing would get done. At some point, people needed to say, okay, I accept this. This is what I'm going to do. This is what people are telling me to do. I'm just going to do it, because that's how things get done. Because you can't sit and, debate everything. You can't sit and question everything and dissect everything, because eventually you'll just waste time talking about it, but never actually achieving anything. So if you want a society that actually functions, and where people aren't always just stopping to ask why all the time, you need some degree of conformism. You need some degree of social trust. And, I imagine for someone like Sinclair Lewis, who's more of an intellectual, more of a writer, who's more interested in, you know, the literary arts, so sure, maybe middle class conformity is not for him, but not everyone can be him. Not everyone can be a Sinclair Lewis. We need people who are just, do the boring everyday jobs and who just, get married, start a family because that's what society expects. I mean, our species is kind of going to die out if we don't do that. So a lot of this sort of unthinking conformity actually serves a purpose, and it's actually necessary for a society to function. So I don't know. To me, Sinclair Lewis kind of comes off like an edgelord for his era. Not that that term existed back then, I'm sure, but that's essentially what he was. He was the guy mocking from the peanut gallery, but he wasn't really saying what people needed to do differently. He wasn't offering a vision of anything. He's just saying, stop conforming all the time, people. So I'll give Babbitt credit for making me think about these things, making me question, or give me the impetus to reflect on certain ideas I have. But I would not call it a great novel. I wouldn't call it an important novel necessarily. It's one that people could survive just fine without it. It's like I said, a lot of it feels kind of dated because it just feels like the kind of stuff that, you know, wannabes would say, like, oh, stop conforming, man, just do your own thing. You don't have to do what everybody else does. It's like, yeah, just you really don't get it. And I'm not saying that we should all just be slavish conformists where we never think for ourselves. I'm just saying, sometimes following what other people are doing makes sense because the reason they do it that way is because that's what works best. And trying to sit and question everything and ask why all the time just gets everybody confused. So yeah, I guess those are my thoughts on Babbitt and about conformity in general. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. So thanks for watching. Talk to you later.